James Carr walked to the microphone at a Memphis theater in the winter of 1967 and stopped. He did not speak. He did not sing. He stood at the microphone in complete stillness, the microphone an inch from his lips, the band playing softly behind him, the audience waiting for a very long time. What came out of him when the stillness finally broke is why the people who were in that room that night have spent 50 years trying to explain what they witnessed. Most of them eventually say the same thing. They have never heard a voice like that in their lives, before or since. Nathan Cole was 35 years old in the winter of 1967 and had been running a record shop on Beale Street in Memphis for 8 years. He had sold records through the emergence of Stax and the development of the high record sound and the small label scene that made Memphis one of the most productive cities in American music in the early 1960s. He had listened to more recordings than most people would encounter in several lifetimes, and had developed, in that time, the specific ability to hear the difference between a voice that had been trained and a voice that had something else. Something that did not come from training and could not be produced by it. He had heard James Carr on record. He had come to the theater that evening to hear what the record contained. James Carr was born on June 13, 1942, in Coahoma County, Mississippi, the Delta country where the land was flat and the music was old and the church was the institution that organized everything else, including the terms on which music was available and the conditions under which it was made. He was one of 9 children. The family moved to Memphis when he was a child, into the South Memphis neighborhood where the gospel circuit and the emerging rhythm and blues world occupied the same streets and the same buildings, and where the line between the sacred and the secular was a line that musicians crossed in both directions, depending on what the week required. He sang in the church. He sang with a gospel group called the Sunset Travelers, one of the Memphis gospel groups that performed the circuit of Black Baptist and Pentecostal churches across Tennessee and Mississippi in the late 1952s and early 1960s, where a voice like James Carr's was received with the specific attention of a congregation that understands when something is beyond technique. He was not trained in the formal sense. He had not studied. What he had was the thing that cannot be studied into existence, the specific combination of range and rawness and emotional directness that makes a voice not merely powerful, but necessary. The kind of voice that, when it appears, makes the people who hear it feel that music has been waiting their whole lives to deliver this specific thing to them personally. He signed with Goldwax Records in Memphis in 1964. Goldwax was a small independent label operating in the specific shadow of Stax, not competing with it but occupying a different register of the same world, recording artists that Stax had not found or had not prioritized, finding in the Memphis soul scene the voices that the larger operations had not yet reached. James Carr recorded for Goldwax. You've Got My Mind Messed Up in 1966 reached the rhythm and blues chart and demonstrated to everyone who needed demonstrating that what was on the record was real. The people who paid close attention, the producers, the other musicians, the people whose job was to understand what they were hearing, paid close attention. In 1967, Chips Moman and Dan Penn wrote a song that they believed was built for James Carr's voice. They had written it with his specific quality in mind, the rawness, the vulnerability, the way his voice moved through a lyric as if the lyric were not a composition, but a confession. The dark end of the street was the story of two people meeting in secret, in the places where no one would see them, knowing what they were doing was wrong and unable to stop. It was not a happy song. It was not designed to be. It was designed to put the most difficult human thing at the center and let the voice carry it without ornamentation or excuse, the way the truth sounds when it has been cornered into admitting itself. He recorded it in one take. The people in the room, when he sang it, understood immediately what they had. The recording moved through the rhythm and blues world with the quality of something that is not merely a good record, but a document. Something that will be heard long after the circumstances that produced it have been forgotten. Because the thing at the center of it is older than the song and does not require context to arrive. What the people who knew James Carr also knew, what the people at Goldwax knew, what the musicians who played on his sessions knew, what the people closest to him had been learning since the beginning of his recording career, was that there was a version of James Carr that could produce what The Dark End of the Street contained, and a version that could not produce anything at all. The illness that shaped his life did not have a name that everyone agreed on, in the language of 1967, or in the language of any of the years that followed. What it produced, in practical terms, was a man who could stand at a microphone and access something that almost no one else could access, and who could also stand at a microphone and find nothing there, the access closed, the thing gone, the silence where the music was supposed to be. Nathan arrived at the theater 30 minutes before the show. He found his seat. The room filled, not a large room, not a large crowd, the specific, intimate size of a venue that is appropriate for a Goldwax artist in Memphis in 1967. People who knew the music, people who had heard the record, people who had been told by someone who had heard the record that they needed to be in this room. The band came out. The band set up. The introduction was brief. A man at the side of the stage with a microphone, a name, a round of applause. James Carr walked out from the right wing. He was 24 years old. He was not a large man. He moved toward the center microphone with the specific quality of someone who is doing the thing they are supposed to do and is not entirely certain where the doing is going to lead. He arrived at the microphone. He stood. He did not sing. The band continued playing the introduction, the same 4 bars, cycling, waiting for him to enter. He stood at the microphone. His hands were at his sides. His eyes were open but not focused on anything Nathan could identify. Not the audience, not the band, not the room. He was somewhere that was not the theater in Memphis in the winter of 1967. The band cycled through the introduction again and again. The room was very quiet in the way rooms go quiet when the people in them have understood that something is happening that was not in the program. Nathan did not move. He had been told, had heard it from people who had seen Carr perform before, that this sometimes happened, that the voice was not always available, that the man and the music had a relationship that was not under the man's full control, and that on some evenings the music arrived, and on some evenings it did not arrive, and that the only way to know which kind of evening it was going to be was to wait and find out. He had heard this. He was now experiencing it, and the experience of it was different from the description of it in the way that all experiences are different from their descriptions. Several minutes passed. The band played softly. The room held its position. Then something changed in James Carr's face. Not dramatically, not with the theatrical quality of a man resolving to do something. The change was small, a slight shift in the quality of his presence, a return of focus to the eyes, a breath that was different from the breaths before it. His mouth opened. The voice came. Nathan had heard the record. He had played it in the shop. He had listened to it carefully and had understood from the recording that what was on it was extraordinary. The recording did not fully communicate what was happening in the theater. The recording was a document of the voice. The theater was the voice, at full scale, in the room, with nothing between it and the people it was aimed at. The rawness was different in person, not louder, but more present, the specific quality of sound that has not been processed or adjusted or placed at the correct distance from the listener, but is simply happening in the air and reaching you without mediation. He sang "The Dark End of the Street." He sang it the way it is sung on the recording, which is to say, he sang it as a man who has been found out, confessing to the thing he cannot stop doing and does not want to stop doing. The shame and the desire running through the lyrics simultaneously, neither canceling the other. The room was completely still. Nathan was completely still. The specific stillness of people who have been reached and know it, and are not going to interrupt the reaching by making any sound that would bring them back to themselves before the song is finished. When it ended, the applause was late, in the way it is always late when a room has to come back to itself before it can respond. Nathan sat in his seat for a moment before he joined it. He could not have said exactly what had happened. He could say that it had happened, and that the record, which he had believed was extraordinary, was a record of something that was more extraordinary than the record. James Carr continued recording for Goldwax through the late 1960 seconds. The illness continued alongside the recordings. He was institutionalized more than once. He could not maintain the consistency that a sustained career requires, could not be where the career needed him to be when the career needed him there. He was, in the language of the industry, unreliable, which is the language the industry uses for people whose inner conditions do not align with the industry's scheduling requirements. He released records that people who loved soul music passed from hand to hand. He did not become famous. In the 1990 seconds, he was rediscovered by an audience in Japan, where the Goldwax recordings had developed a devoted following among people who understood what they were hearing. He toured Japan. He performed. He was received as what he was, which the American music industry had not managed to communicate on his behalf. He returned to Memphis. He died on January 7, 2001, in Memphis, Tennessee. He was 58 years old. The Dark End of the Street has been covered by more than 100 artists since 1967, by Graham Parsons, by Elvis Costello, by Linda Ronstadt, by Aretha Franklin. Every version is made in the shadow of the Goldwax recording, which remains the version that the song was made for. Critics who study Southern soul consistently name it one of the greatest recordings in the genre's history. James Carr's name is not widely known outside the people who love the music deeply, which is the specific fate of a man who gave everything he had and was given back, by the world that received it, something much smaller than what he gave. Nathan Cole sold the record shop in 1989. He kept a copy of the Goldwax single behind the counter for 22 years before he sold the shop, and he kept it after. He told anyone who came into the shop and asked him what the greatest voice he had ever heard in person was. He told them about the theater in 1967. He told them about the stillness and what came out of it when it ended. He said, "There are voices that come from practice, and voices that come from somewhere else, and voices that come from somewhere else entirely." James Carr's voice came from the third place. You could hear it in the record. You had to be in the room to understand what that meant. Not the record, the stillness before it opened. Subscribe to Untold Soul Legends. Every week we find the moments behind the music that changed everything. The comments section is open. Tell us which Soul Legends story you want to hear next. If this one stayed with you, share it with someone who needed to hear it today.